1.5 max kind of went through several different versions, several different alterations over the course of about a year. And the idea we all had was that there should be something significant going alongside COP26 when it came about. So there should be a Scottish High Schools COP26, but it shouldn't be something that's particularly exclusive. We felt that there was the chance with a lot of youth summits that it ends up being established activists going there, but we wanted it to be a selection of high school pupils from throughout the country, from various backgrounds, or just united by the will to do something. The whole thing was really driven by just the significance of the moment and what's sometimes being called Scotland's Year of Climate Action, and just there being a chance to learn how others were making the emergency part of their practice. The whole project sort of got bigger all the time. It started with a few schools in Scotland, maybe 6 schools, then it became 9 schools in Scotland, then it became with 2 overseas schools included in Mozambique, and then it became 4 overseas schools in Mozambique, Malawi, and Nepal. If you look at all the stuff that came out from the teachers and from the pupils, it was more than worth making it as ambitious as this with the school selection that we had. There were a few things we wanted to try and achieve and that we wanted to push forward, and many of them are not necessarily the single event of the summit, but the legacy of the summit. So we wanted to stimulate climate action of sorts in schools and in communities. So we wanted to give young people the chance to actually take action where they were living, so that we weren't making the whole task feel completely overwhelming as it does in many cases. We hear often about rising climate anxiety, as it's called, among young people, where the challenge seems so enormous and formidable. But as they see it, and in many senses I agree with them, almost nothing that's meeting the challenge is happening, almost no action. So we wanted to give them that sense that actually we can do something ourselves, and we can do it with a group of like-minded individuals rather than having to face it all down ourselves. So that was the second aim, I suppose, is just to provide ordinary young citizens of Scotland and of other countries as well, as it then became, with that sense of empowerment, with a sense that they could take this on, and they could do so in not a small way, but a local way. And then more generally, what we wanted it to be the springboard for was a chance to develop a whole school approach to learning for sustainability. So what we wanted was to have this big moment where we're all going as schools. This is important. We're going to set aside 3 days for this. Students are going to focus on not just the challenges in their own area relating to climate action, whether it's adaptation related or mitigation related. They're going to see what other schools are facing as well. They're going to empathize with schools across the world in some of the hardest hit countries that you can find. And they're going to get that sense of urgency and see why we are taking 3 days out of school specifically to look at this. We started off by asking the schools for a problem statement. Each school was to produce a problem statement describing the nature of how climate change was affecting their region or their school, and a video story to go with that. So pupils explaining, this is what our problem is. And this was the first stage where we're basically saying the students are taking a leading role here. They come up with the problem they would like to solve. And that was embraced across the cluster that we put together through Connecting Classrooms. But the actual summit itself was obviously the key thing. And the whole thing started with a series of activities which were meant to foster that sense of global solidarity with children in Nepal, children in Mozambique, Malawi, immediately getting that sense of urgency along with that. The whole thing was peppered with video stories which gave a perspective on the climate emergency from young people in the Arctic, from farmers in Ethiopia, anything really. People who were affected directly by the emergency. So the whole thing wasn't purely about reinforcing the science, because many of the young people who we had with us already knew a lot about that. We wanted it to be about the stories associated with the climate emergency. So there was that emotional aspect. We were all confronting the emotions of the emergency together. So those video stories were peppered throughout for inspiration, and the kids really reacted to that well. We also had a keynote speaker session on the first day. We had a marvelous speaker called Carmen Munuketi from Mozambique. She started with Mozambique culture and say, this is our country, getting to, a chance to get to know Mozambique. And that transitioned us very nicely into the getting to know you session, which was extremely well received by the pupils, because the pupils in my school, Boromir, had a chance to speak to students on this screen here from Janakalyan Secondary School in Nepal, as well as students in all 4 schools in the Western Isles of Scotland. Kids were able to talk to other kids in other parts of the world.
Hi, my name is Tandisa. I'm 13 years old. I'm from Mozambique and I'm a pupil at Janakalyan Secondary School.
Hi, my name is Thol. I live in Para, Western Isles. I have lots of concerns about climate change.
Going from there, we had an activity on country comparisons, and this was looking at the global picture of climate change and giving students a chance to better understand the social and economic factors driving it. So that was starting with things like ordering the countries by population. What do you think it's going to be? Now let's have a look at what it actually is. So looking at your expectations versus reality. Doing the same with measures like GDP, and in some cases educating them on that, what that was, of course. Carbon footprint per capita annually. Something called the Happy Planet Index, which takes into account ecological footprint, but also life expectancy and well-being in a country, and sort of getting them to compare these different metrics. So there was a real opportunity for the kids to get to know the issue from a global perspective and understand why we've had the Paris Agreement signed, but there's been insufficient action since then. Why is that? Getting them to think critically about it. This day 2 and day 3 were set aside for the big main task of the summit, which is the Ideas Lab. So this was giving the kids a chance, first of all, to look through the problem statements across the cluster. So they're not just thinking about their own problem, they're empathizing with the problems faced by other communities in Scotland, whether they're facing flooding and also, or whether they're facing waste management issues, but also looking across to Mozambique, Malawi, Nepal, and looking at more extreme issues of flooding and erosion and schools being based next to dumps where they're burning waste regularly, resulting in respiratory issues for the kids, and all these massive kind of things, which immediately made the kids go, "Oh, okay, this is serious." The Ideas Lab continued with a session on solutions. So getting the kids to think of really any solution they could come up with, giving the kids a chance to come up with many, many creative solutions, as many as they could possibly, and being as ambitious as they wanted with it. But then whittling it down into ones they were actually going to decide, we're going to tackle this. And giving the kids a real leading role, constantly deferring to them. What do you think is the most urgent challenge? How would you like to tackle it? And giving them the chance to think really creatively and imaginatively about that. And then going beyond the Ideas Lab, we finished the summit with 2 activities. Firstly, a panel event. So we had a panel of sustainability experts taking all of the stuff that the schools have produced, all of which were uploaded to an app called Wakelet, so we could store images and links and videos and PDFs all in one place. And we had the panel summarize what they'd seen. So across all these schools, what did they find particularly impressive? So just giving kids in Boromir and Musselburgh and wherever a chance to hear what schools in Mozambique, Malawi, Nepal, schools in the Western Isles, what have they all been doing? What's everyone else been up to? And taking all that together. Once we'd had a listen to that, the final session was about the young people making pledges. So what do they want to see happen next in their school? What are they now going to do so that the whole thing wasn't just a one-off event, it was something that was going to have a legacy. It was better than we ever could have expected. We actually did a survey of all the pupils across the cluster, and they were coming back with words like unforgettable, really enjoyed linking up with pupils across the world, loved tackling things hands-on. They love the fact that we've just been given a chance to not just talk about the climate emergency, but to act on it. They really appreciated that. And there were poems written, there were trees planted, there were school improvement plans written, there were whole school interdisciplinary units written, there were MSPs and MPs met with during just these 3 days. And that goes to show just how seriously the pupils took it all on. The best thing for me is that the overseas schools loved it. All 4 of them got a huge amount out of it. They managed to connect with us. They managed to speak with us. They managed to learn from everything we've put together. They managed to teach us so much about what they're facing. Young people now have a chance to say, this must happen now. And it more than likely will now happen. So we're looking for a step change, really, in all the schools, but to speak to each other about that, to learn about that, and potentially even do other kind of offshooting projects between schools in Scotland and these schools overseas, which we are with whom we are not going to lose contact with. We want that partnership to keep going, to keep providing us with all sorts of ways we can continue to push this forwards, climate education and climate action in our schools. And if that's the legacy of 1.5 Max, then that would be brilliant. That would be a real achievement for us.